say, hoş geldiniz there. I would say, welcome to Kyrgyzstan.
And I invite 4 different people up here on the stage for a panel discussion on GGPs, what happens before, what happens after, before the node and after the node, and what's the relevance of the GGP initiative for our GFRAS network. So I invite Marisa Paredes. She's the Executive Secretary of RELATER, the Latin American Network for Rural Advisory Services. Then Adolphus Johnson, the chair of AFAS, the African Forum on Agricultural Advisory Services. And then I also have Frederic Matras from FIO, Knowledge Management Specialist. And Ernst Bolliger, where do we have him? Consultant here. Consultant for Switzerland, who has also been working a lot in knowledge management and experience capitalization. Can we go back to that slide before? Yes. This one. Yes, thank you. And I will go in the middle. Maybe you can take the chairs a bit in front so that people, that we don't have, yes, it's not hard to put behind the. Okay. Christine has said before that GFRAS is very interested in linking this initiative that had started off with just a few people, more with the practice, get more feedback. So I have 2 representatives from the two regional networks here. So I would like to start with you, Marisa, from your experience in the Latin American network. Could you just tell us a bit what in your view is the relevance of GGP for your network?
Thank you very much. From working in a network, I see that people working in extension in different countries and in regional levels, they are always very eager to share what they are doing and also to learn what their colleagues or partners are doing. But this is somehow a challenge, and I think this is why the forums, RAS forums, have come to exist, because there are some elements. One is that the practice itself needs to be documented. You need to generate evidence, you need to explain what you are doing. In the second point, you need an audience. So who is the people that is going to hear this? Should I go directly to a policymaker to explain or to tell what these good practices consists about? In the third stage, there is a point of experiencing and networking, because if there's a good practice only in a sheet, maybe that will never come to an action. You need to know the person that is really working on that, or to see the experience itself. As I mentioned, that is why the country forums and the regional networks are important, because they are making this space for networking, for building relationships, to create the audience. So the country forum is linking the key stakeholders that will be the ones that will be making actions afterwards. And also they know what are the practices that are around, and they are able to document, identify, and so on.
Okay, thank you. So I hear already 2 links that you make. One is that you say we have a lot of experiences and good practices in our region, but often it's just not documented. So this is kind of a potential of the GGP initiative to have really be more aware of the necessity to document. And the second aspect of a note is not enough, it's about linking people and your network. And particularly on country level, the country fora are very important.
Yeah, I would say both, because the country fora, they will promote the dialogue inside, and in the regional level, the exchange between countries, so or even in global. So, like, you need all the connections. Otherwise, you see only to your feet, and
Okay, thank you. Adolphus, do you want to add from your perspective from the African network where you see the relevance of the GGP?
Cord that I can borrow again. from the African perspective, Africa is a country where we're all similar, mostly. So 70% of Africa are all black, but we still have so many diversities in terms of systems, in terms of personnel, in terms of approaches, in terms of even the political, social, and economic dynamics within our countries. And these have an effect, an impact on how rural crisis services will function, how effective or efficient they are, and to what extent they can meet the required goals. We find that various countries which in Africa have RAS, and they are functioning at quite different levels, and they are achieving different levels of goals. So this initiative is one that would be very relevant once this information is documented and once they're shared, because not enough to share at the share fair, but we have to look at other means for this documentation to go far enough, because ICT in Africa, the internet, the websites, are not really the general things we could have, because 70% of Africa is cut off from the internet. We need to have other means by which these practices are shared right down to the grassroots level and people are able to understand. But once these good practices are shared around, it would make a very good understanding and base, a platform from which the learning would move up the next step to practice. And we'll find that there will be improvement. What AFAS as a regional body has tried to do is to see how we can contribute to improving the effectiveness and the efficiency of rural advisory services in Africa. And these global good practices could be one way that AFAS can work with to circulate information among its members, to see that these practices are adapted in various situations. So it's very relevant and it is timely in my view, but I think the dispersal of the practices has to be beyond just the website, beyond just the share fairs. There has to be more practical ways. The country forum have to be involved at that level, and we need to have more buy-in, because in Africa, 70% of the extension of RAS is public and managed by the government systems. So the actual incorporation of these practices would also have to depend on to what extent we're able to reach all these levels in Africa. But the country for a good standpoint, and I support this initiative, and I think we have to take it forward. But like the professor said, we want to make it also not so complicated. We're saying so many reviewers and reviewers and reviewers. Good practice can be very raw and not very technical at some point, but then it is a practice, so that we make room for people to come up with them. They may be very simple, they may not be very much in the cloud, but they are good practices. We open the space for more good practices to come.
Thank you. Keep the microphone. Thanks a lot. So it's a question of how we get the practices to the people, and I would like to take up one question that you just said at the end. What makes a good practice a good practice? And Christine gave a definition before. I would like to ask Frederick from FAO. I know you also have a definition. What is your what makes in your view a good practice? A good practice?
Okay, so before we start, maybe giving the full definition, I would like to say yes, we do work around the concept of good practice versus other practices, because like my fellow panelists, we totally agree in our team at FAO. We are all very eager to share, and we are so eager to share that we tend to forget all the steps that are necessary beforehand. The sharing is crucial, it's part of the cycle. Many different aspects of sharing, many different ways, like a lot of people saying. So in our team, we tend to think of this as a cycle. So we tend to also, we look at the concept of a good practice versus other practices, because not all experiences are also good to share. You can't share everything, so you really have to understand where you stand in your experience, where is your practice, is it really a good practice? So the first thing I would like to say is we don't talk about best fit, but it's exactly our same approach like Christine was saying. We talk about good practice versus best practice, because best practice tends to give the feeling that there is no further improvement. So the adaptability, the replicability potential is really not in the concept of best practice. I would say best fit from Christine and our good practice is the same. We tend to work not necessarily on a definition, but around criteria. And then this later in the boundary that we will do in the document, we will explain later. We tend also to work on the level of evidence that you have on your experience. What level of evidence, what results do you have? So we have a new concept also that our colleagues work also around, is the term promising practice. Promising practice is a future good practice, and that's also important to share. So we work on this, and all of this is gained through a process that we call experience capitalization. The process of experience capitalization will help you identify your practice. Is it an experience? Is it an innovation? Are you a bit further? Are you more toward a promising practice? Are you at the step of you've drawn so many lessons, you've repeated your cycle so many times that you've corrected your mistakes, you've re-injected the learning into your practice, and your practice is now a good practice and you can share it. So we tend to work also on this step further. So the cycle, the process of experience capitalization is really a cycle with different steps, where you will identify, you will analyze your work, and then with many tools, we work on different developing tools. You learn from your experience, you gather all your data, you draw learning, and then finally you can start gathering the data and think about what you want to share, how to put it together. Because the ultimate goal of the good practices work is really about bringing about change, improving not only your work, but also so that your practice is adopted by others, adapted, and adopted. That's one of the best. So the definition, I will not say the definition, more on the criteria.
That's what I wanted.
That's very, very similar to what...
Okay, good. Thanks a lot. Yeah, that's good. As you just mentioned quickly, I'll just add to that. You will have, together with your colleague, a role play on this process of experience capitalization, of maybe also the why people are sometimes hesitant to enter that process. It will be a creative, fun way during the share fair. At the end of this morning in New York. If you want to learn more about this, you can go there. Just a short commercial. We continue. Christine has showed us this slide over there with the aim of how they see the aim and what happens before the GGP notes and what happens after. And I would like to ask you to comment a bit on, or to add your view of where does actually learning happen around these GGPs?
Yeah, I think learning is the key in the whole system. And I would see 4 moments where different learning happens. One is while making the experience. I think it's normal that you sit together in a team and you reflect what you did today and you learn about the daily practice. And then follows the moment where you maybe reflect 1 full year of experience and you draw a report or a learning. And I think these 4 pages that we was presenting is somehow a digest of such kind of learnings that came out from different teams, bring it together into a more combined learning out of different sources. On the other hand, there are future applicants. And there for me the learning happens with the questions, what actually do we want to know for future actions? And then experience capitalization starts. You have your question, you look around, what kind of experience is available? What do we know ourselves? What do our working partners know? What do we find in international sources such as GFRAS website, such as FAO website, etc. And you bring together capital, like if you want to build a house. You have first a plan, you know what you would like to build, and then you go to the bank and you look whether they have capital available they can give you. So you go to GFRAS, you look what capital is available to build your next project. And finally, moment number 4 of learning is while implementing projects, you have good practices, you try to put into practice, but you have to learn a lot while adapting it to the local conditions, as Christine also presented on one of their slides. There I see 4 key moments of learning in a process of sharing experience from practice to practice. And maybe one short word, a global good practice for me is something that is globally put into practice and thus good effects for the people we work for.
Thank you, Anne. So I just take out this element that was for me a bit new now, that you say experience capitalization has to start with the question of the ones who want to make use of it. It's more a demand view than on we have nice experiences and we would just supply.
Maybe I might add, without a clear guiding question, experience capitalization does not have a good orientation, a clear way ahead. It goes in any direction.
So that is linked to what you said also, that was in these flashes on the slide, this how can we ensure that there's a closeness to the actual relevance to the practitioners and to the questions and the challenges the practitioners have. Thank you. I would like to go into some examples. I like to learn a bit now from different examples and cases and experiences you have made. And I will ask you if you have any good example where you say this was an example where we had somehow in a good way identified a good practice and we could adapt it and adopt it well in another context. Maybe Adolphus, you have an example? A good example? Successful?
Yeah, in Africa, one of the biggest successes in recent time has been the battle to curb corruption in input distribution in Africa, particularly in our big border state, Nigeria. Before it was very difficult for inputs, particularly fertilizer, to reach the farmer, the end user. And when it reached, we were not even sure it was the right thing that was reaching the person. But then, with the intervention of the country forum, the Nigerian forum, MEFAS, and advocacy and influence in the public sector, the Ministry of Agriculture, they were able to contribute to charting the agricultural transformation agenda in that country. And currently they have used the ICT, the e-wallet, where farmers have their vouchers and can collect fertilizers direct without going through middlemen. And this is something that it might not be global, because it might not be a problem in Europe, but it's a problem for Africa and it's significant, because over 80% of the population depends on agriculture. And one of the limiting factors of productivity is the access to enhancements like fertilizer. So if that kind of practice and the way it was done is shared effectively to other countries, it could help other countries to curb the problem. There is a problem in my own country that Sierra Leone needs to learn from, and I'm sure over 50% of Africa needs to learn from. So that's one practice that I think needs to come up. And I'm sure it might not only be Africa, because corruption is something that pervades across us. And I think the effective working between GFRAS community and the state actors, when they work together, then they can be able to address certain issues and bring about equity in terms of access to inputs for agriculture.
So I hear it was one element is that it really addressed one key challenge that the country and other countries experience. Can you say a bit more, maybe another word, what was also an element that made it a success? You mentioned the cooperation with the government.
And then the ownership and buying from the stakeholders. Because a good practice, like we're talking about the West Fleet, has to deal with the environmental condition, has to deal with the end user, to what extent he's able to, like he said, the future user is able to ask, what will there be in this for me? And with that, if the answer is, it is going to be positive, it's going to improve my yields, ultimately my productivity returns to learn, then he is going to want to move in. And other countries can capitalize on the experience of Nigeria. But I think when we talk about good practices, we must go in terms of the evidence, not just evidences that are a flash in the pan, but evidences that are rooted in a very good base where we have there is a buying at all levels, and that there is in the view of the end user a cost-benefit analysis. It says that there is a cost-benefit to adapting that kind of practice. I would want to say that I still think when we talk about global good practices, it depends on where the countries are. It depends on what their needs are. So it might not be global, but it might be a good practice in a region. It may be a good practice in a sub-region. And I think we need to capture all of these, rather than just looking at the very global perspective and looking at. Because if we're looking from the end user perspective, it does not matter if it covers the whole world, it matters if one farmer's life will change, if one household will change. So a good practice depends on the situation, but ultimately, to what extent it will be demanded, given the analysis of the benefits that will result.
So a good practice is only one that brings effect, good effect, no matter if it's global or... Thank you for this example from Nigeria. I would like to ask Marita to share a good example from your experience.
Yes. Well, when you asked me this question, I thought about an ongoing process we have in Latin America. The idea started in 2014. We call them South-South RAS Innovation Exchanges. This started after a course we conducted together with FAO and MEAS and RELACER, where the last day the participants had the opportunity to talk in pairs and say, okay, if I have a chance to learn something from your country, what would it be? So we had a documentation of this, and the year after we followed this up. So we came back and said, okay, you said these experiences were interesting from your partner country. Do you think that we can really organize an exchange and to share about this? The results have been very interesting because with a very small money, we have been able to multiply the effect, and the organizations and institutions in both countries have been complementing this investment, let's say, and they have been very involved in the initiatives. Also, we have seen that a lot of high-level policymakers have engaged in the exchanges in different ways, and the results on the topic of the exchanges are very different. So just to give you an example of one of them, there was one between the Dominican Republic and Nicaragua. The Dominican Republic said, we would like to know about extension methodologies that Nicaragua has been using because they have innovated in that way. And then with the $2,000 of the exchange, we brought two professionals from Nicaragua to the Dominican Republic. And a key element there is that the country fora of Nicaragua organized the exchange. So all the institutions sit together and plan what they will present, what was the most important information, and a lot of these institutions also complemented. So it was not only two professionals, but three. And also, as there was an international NGO there, they sent a person from Haiti to this exchange in the Dominican Republic, and we never worked before with Haiti. So then they went to the Dominican Republic. The first day they met a lot of RAS stakeholders, FAO, ICA, the ministry, etc. The next 3 days they visited producer organizations from different levels. They heard their demands, their needs. They also presented what they were doing. And in the last day, they went back to the capital and they made a forum with a broader group of stakeholders. So in that space, they discussed again what they have done, their experiences, and the results are wide. So, for example, Kathy, this university, I don't remember the name exactly, but they are now finding a way to train extensionists in the Dominican Republic after this exchange. And there are like other ideas that should follow up later that we don't know what exactly will happen, but I think this has a lot of potential. We made 6 of these exchanges, and we expect to document the experience afterwards. And I would like to highlight here the role of the country fora. In the countries that we did not have a country fora, to organize this was very, very difficult. Because then it depends on a person, that sometimes they are busy, but when you have like a group of stakeholders that is in charge of bringing this idea forward, I think you generate, in one hand, it's like a positive peer pressure somehow, because you have this offer and they kind of say, okay, let's plan something, and they start to be active in this initiative. So I think that's...
Thank you. So there's this element of a longer partnership between countries or country fora to have a longer exchange, so more learning happens, and there's this kind of relationship built up.
Yes, and also like this is a very good way to capture the demand, because then the stakeholders themselves, they tell you what they want to learn, and at the same time, neighbor countries, they know the reality of the other country. It's normally very similar, so the suggestions and the approaches are very good to the context, so they are down to earth when they hear it.
So we have again these different levels of global, regional, and we will get back to this. I hear it again and again, country fora. Don't know if everybody is aware of country fora being like sub-networks of the regional networks on country level. We will take up that issue on Thursday, because I think in many networks it's a very relevant issue. Maybe, can I ask you to something about that? What's then the relevance of the global good practice? You think there's still, we hear a lot of the potential of exchange in regions, between neighbors. Is there relevance to have global exchange of good practices, or are the contexts just too different?
I learned a lot of people living in a completely different context. And sometimes not things to copy, but things that were intriguing to me, irritating, but put into practice, reflection of the own practice, and led me to find good solutions in my context. Also, their application was somehow completely different.
Very quick remark, which is very close. I find there's nothing wrong about talking about global good practices, as long as each and every practice, whether it's promising or good practice, is context given. And that you have done all your learning on your practice, you've answered your questions, you've corrected your mistakes, you know your practice, and you know maybe how this can be adapted to other contexts. There's no global context as such. I think it's really a combination, integration of many different local, regional context challenges that are being addressed, and you ask your question, why and how they address that.
You want to add something?
Yeah, I would like to add, maybe it's just a simple question. Why do you do it the way you do it? That puzzled me several times when I discovered how finally there is just a practice. We do it because we always did it like this, but in fact there is no logic, no broad reason, and that's, I think, the starting point of a very fruitful reflection of the own practice.
So I hear the call here, because we are at the global meeting, I hear a bit the call to all of us to be just really open for anything that is presented, in the sense of it can be quite irritating. You could first think, oh, this has nothing to do with my practice, but to be open for that and take it to reflect your own practice, to really improve there, because that's where you can improve in your own. Let's get some more examples of experience optimization processes, learning new practices. Maybe this time I will start with Ernst. If you could share one that has not worked as well as you'd hoped for, and what we can learn from that.
I knew about this question, so one example was the experience capitalization STC did about the whole livestock sector in India. It was an experience for more than 30 years, and at this, or towards the end of this long period of cooperation, STC decided to do an experience capitalization. And already the authors of this capitalization brought forward a lot of useful learnings, lessons learned, a lot of convincing material, but they had the opinion probably we are a bit late with several lessons based on this long period. And then also people who could have applied many of these lessons said it's very cute, very intelligent, this lesson, but somehow 20 years too late to put it into practice. And what I learned out of it, it's good for strategic orientations to keep a long period in view. But for operational issues, for next steps in a program, I think 30 years is definitely too long way back, and it's better to concentrate on a time period of the last 5 to 10 years.
Good. Further, same question to you.
Something that has worked not as much.
Yeah.
Okay. I have a couple similar examples. We've learned that very often the work linked to good practices and experience capitalization, they think it ends with documenting very nice projects, and very often we confuse it with corporate communication, or the teams want to have their work be known to the wider organization and public. So it's a very, very different process. Corporate communication or communication in general has a different goal. So not every product will fit every purpose. To give you a very concrete example, a couple months ago, we're helping technical teams within FAO to document resilience good practices within FAO. And the team in West Bank Gaza had a very interesting practice. Let's put it this way, it's interesting. It's fodder production, using the hydroponics. I'm not a technical person, so I'm not going to explain what it is, but it's very interesting because in an area where there is shortage of water, this was very interesting, and it was flagged to us by technical people. They did document with our template to document good practice, and it was sold to us as a good practice. It was fastly documented, probably too fast. It was published. The whole net resilience went to another practice, but then very soon it realized the learning of this was done too fast. Therefore, there was not proper learning on this. Therefore, not the questions had been answered, and so there was no learning, meaning that the practice cannot be adopted because the errors have not been corrected. So nobody can adopt it. So it was really a product to raise interest on this practice. So we had to correct the process. So we stepped back a while. We did a little bit of capitalization. We have shown the process. It turned out it is definitely a promising practice with lots of very interesting potential. With technical people who took the time to answer the questions correctly, or they're going to repeat the practice a couple of times. They're going to document it, and now a wider network is interested, and they're going to try to adapt this in other countries, not even the same region. So I think it's important to take the time that it takes.
So the time to implement it, to do it, and to keep on asking oneself, why are we doing it this way, or could we still improve?
Exactly. Why do we do it this way? Why does it answer these challenges? How can I address this context with the challenge of food insecurity? For example, the water shortage in Gaza, there's lots of other problems. So if you really want to document practically, you're not doing a glossy communication project, because you want this practice to be adopted by others. You want to share your results. You want others not to repeat your mistakes. You've addressed your mistakes, and you're also not afraid of communicating your mistakes because they're very interesting for others. First of all, because we all make mistakes, so it's good to know that you're not alone. But second, most important is that you found some solutions. They're not the best, but you give ideas of potential solutions. That would probably be useful for others. That's what's important. That also good practice. It's also not to be afraid to communicate your challenges. This is your constraint, and what solution can you find? It's the why.
This whole process that you have to have gone through until you document, you already have to have.
So it's not the what only, it's also the why and how we do that is important.
Thank you. I would like to open the panel soon. Just one more question I would like to give to all four of you, and then we will open to the plenary. The question to you is what suggestions you have now to to GFRAS. GFRAS being actually all of us here in the room, not only the secretariat and the groups, but everybody, in how to further develop or how to continue with this initiative. As Fredrik said, they've started off small. They're willing now to learn. What are your suggestions, recommendations, ideas you want to give? Who wants to start? I think I'm started.
Well, I think that all of us should know that we can all mention like this is a good practice. Let's study this. I think that the important point is to know that we will own this information, and we have the capacity, or we are expected to contribute and to say what we think about it. So, as a country or as a regional network, as a member of GFRAS or member of a working group, you can always say it and think about it and propose and see what happens.
So not wait for them to come from somewhere above,
yeah,
but contribute. Thank you. Who wants to? You want to?
Yeah, my own view is that I would like I said, the practices, the space to be open, so that we can receive what we might not call global, but they are good practices because they have worked. Because in my view, I am very tired of experimentation good practices, where people come in and do a project and it seems to have worked because their inputs were on it and it worked for 10 years, and when they left, there were problems. For example, the farmer field schools well acclaimed. Practically in Africa, the farmer field schools have failed to replicate because the conditions that were required for the next set to replicate for the homegrown transfer among farmer field schools is really not as it was supposed to be, but in the times when the evidence was collected, they were working. So I would like to see what is the source of this practice, what is the ownership of this practice. These are the things that evidence has to tell us. Not so much what the tangible successes at the time were, but what those intangible values that were engendered by that practice, and what are the residual benefits that will be there that will take it on. We don't want to document good practices that will die after 5 years and it is confined to history or theoretical things. We want to make sure, although yes, the content changes with time and the rest, but I want to see where does it come from and how is it owned by the end user. Let's have more focus. When you put a practice, this should be part of the criteria to know that we can continue and keep it.
Thank you. So to have it really not fit into the context and really embedded and owned in the context, and to also show that when you say it. Thank you.
I think we all know that now these 4 pages are good practices, but this is not the final point. And I think what is important linked to good practices is something I learned from Robert James. All the people in this room might know who he is. Young people might ask. He once told, you must make it mystically attractive. A good practice must attract the interest of people. And somebody in this meeting asked me, how can we make sure that global good practices will be applied in practice? And my opinion is, we can't. We can't make sure. We just can make it mystically attractive. And hope that it will lead to next innovative steps in the whole process of research, of content and methodology.
Very quickly, I find that all that has been done so far is state of the art. Now, what I would be very interested in is the next step, the sharing. So I'm not here to tell you because I'm sure you know there are many, many different ways of sharing, so it would be interesting to see and to be much down to earth with respect to ants is also that they need to find it useful. I find our good practices if people buy in, like Adolphus was saying, if they find it useful, that's very interesting. So all the sharing aspect, we've worked a lot on all the different possibilities of sharing. Even once you have all your data, we work with theatrical producers to share the information on the good practice, so they see potential. We've worked on also knowledge share, very highly organized. We've done documents on that. Many different ways of, I think, the sharing so it can be adopted because there's so many good materials. So what is the next step?
Okay, thank you. So I see lots of questions. Let's take, can I have somebody going around with a microphone? There. Yeah, in the back. And then.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, my position and understanding is that the word global does not mean the 5 continents, but it's just talking about a wider scope of application. Because of the argument of the context, it is not practically possible to have a practice that we can do in every city, in every country, in every. So the global there, if I'm wrong, I want to be corrected. I don't think the global there means the global in the sense of the world on our hands or the globe or geography.
Yeah.
Now, these notes are guidelines, my own interpretation. They are basic facts and figures that a particular principle has led to success in a particular location, given these peculiarities, and that I can build on the same principle to solve similar problems somewhere else. In Kenya, there was M-Pesa, or there is M-Pesa, to transfer money on mobile phone from place to place. In other parts of Africa, looking at the way the program began or whatever has been written in the computer work, they call it other names, using the same principle, and now funds are being transferred between individuals. For example, we listen to the short presentation on the video by Access Agriculture. They are documenting how to use video to disseminate, to share. Now, a GDP knows on that, tell other people in other parts of the world how you can make video to share. But it does not mean that Access is going to produce video for the whole continent and the whole country and things like that. I think this clarification is what I'm putting forward as we go along with the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe I'll quickly ask Christine if she can give us a bit what was your view? Why did you call it global good practice? What's your view? What makes it global?
Thanks. I did actually need to mention that in our presentation.
And we said it, first of all, because it sounds nice. Global good practice. No, but also we had that discussion when we were reviewing a lot of the proposals that came in for good practices. And we said, you know what, this has only been used in one country or one region. At this point, we don't think we could call it global good practice. We want practices that can be used, adapted, modified to other conditions. So the global good practices should be something, okay, it's used in one country, but we think it can be used in other countries, or we've seen it being used in multiple countries, of course always adapted to the local conditions. So we have that global perspective where it's useful in more than just one country or one region.